Why was she the only one who noticed the silence before the storm? Sergeant Wraith Foster kept her cheek pressed against the cold limestone, her rifle steady, her heart far less so. The others were shifting positions, whispering into radios, cursing under their breath as the canyon funneled their voices back at them like ghosts mocking the living. But she was listening to something else, or rather, the absence of it. The wilderness had fallen still in a way she didn't trust. No distant trickle of mountain streams. Even the wind seemed to have retreated, like the earth itself was holding its breath. She exhaled slowly, too slowly. She knew what was coming. And then, like a cruel answer to the dread pressing into her ribs, the valley lit up with gunfire. Bullets shredded the stone inches above her head. They didn't just arrive, they screamed, cracked, tore the air open like it was paper. The first instinct was to return fire, but her gut told her to wait. Her rifle tracked north, then east, then west. Too many muzzle flashes, too many firing points. Contact front, contact left, contact right, she whispered, her voice tight, even though protocol demanded she call it louder. Her radio spat static before a voice forced its way through. "This is SEAL Team Charlie. We're pinned down, taking heavy fire, requesting immediate backup." The reply was ice-cold, mechanical. "Negative, Charlie. No assets available. You're on your own." Closed her eyes for half a second. On your own. That phrase carried weight when you were already outnumbered 5-1, when you were already bleeding, when you were already out of options. She shifted, her scope locking on the eastern. "I count at least 52, she muttered through gritted teeth. "Maybe more. They've got us in a complete kill box." Her words weren't panic. They were calculation, precision under pressure. Still, her jaw was tight. She'd seen ambushes before, but never one this clean. Whoever set this up wasn't improvising. This was planned, rehearsed, perfected. Lieutenant Commander Blake, Titan to the team, pressed his back against the ravine wall, his arm bleeding, his vest torn to shreds. His voice was low, cracked with fatigue. "We're running out of time. Hold positions. Make every shot count." Wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe control hadn't already slipped from their hands. But she could hear it in his tone. They were surviving second to second, not minute to minute. The enemy pressed them hard, machine guns carving the rock into dust, forcing the SEALs to crouch lower and lower, until it felt like the mountain itself was crushing them. Shifted her scope, her finger feathering the trigger. She dropped one hostile on then another. But for every muzzle flash she silenced, 3 more opened up. Her magazine was depleting too fast. The men around her were shouting reloads, calling for cover, gritting through the inevitability of it all. Her stomach twisted, not with fear, that was manageable, with the thought that this might be it, that she would never make it back to her little brother's graduation, never drink that coffee she promised herself in Paris when the deployment ended, never send the letter she had folded twice in her pocket, the one that said more than she ever dared to in person. "Command, this is Charlie Actual. We are in extreme danger, surrounded by superior numbers, ammunition low." Titan's voice crackled, sharp, trying not to break. The pause that followed was unbearable. Seconds stretched. A minute passed. A minute too long. Then, "Charlie Actual, no air assets in range. Closest Army aviation 70 minutes out. Can you hold?" 70 minutes. Almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat like broken glass. They didn't have 70 minutes. They barely had 7. "Negative," Titan growled. "We need assistance now, or you'll be explaining 12 funerals back home." Ducked as rounds sparked against the rock. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from rage. Rage at the way their lives were reduced to radio chatter, at the way distance and bureaucracy turned blood into numbers. She tried to steady her breathing, but inside she was unraveling. She thought of her father's words before she enlisted. "Don't do this to be a hero. Do this to be human. Heroes die for applause. Humans endure for each other." And then something cut through. A sound, sharp, clean, distinct from the chaos. Crack. She froze. That wasn't one of theirs. It wasn't the enemy either. It was something else entirely. She whipped her scope toward the eastern ridge. A hostile muzzle flash winked out like a candle snuffed in the dark. "What the hell was that?" she asked, though part of her already knew. Another crack followed, and another enemy position went silent. The men started whispering, voices cracking with disbelief. Who the hell's shooting? Where did that come from? Scanned, eyes wide, heart hammering. No visual, nothing but jagged cliffs and shadow. But someone was out there, someone good, too good. Her earpiece buzzed, and then a voice entered their net. Calm, controlled, unfamiliar. "SEAL Team Charlie, this is Ghost 6. Maintain your positions and allow me to work." Pulse jumped. The voice wasn't like command. It wasn't strained, frantic, detached. It was steady, solid, professional. Whoever it was, they sounded certain. Titan snarled back, "Ghost 6, identify yourself. Unit designation, mission authority." The pause before the reply was deliberate, unsettling. "No official unit, Charlie, just an observer, one who doesn't like seeing Americans being slaughtered by foreign operatives." Another crack, another hostile dropped. Blinked, her throat tight. Whoever Ghost 6 was, their accuracy was unreal. Each shot was surgical, each decision faster than hers, and she prided herself on never hesitating. Her scope caught glimpses of confusion in enemy ranks, men shouting, ducking, breaking formation. Panic. A perfect ambush unraveling. "Holy Christ," one of the SEALs whispered. "Whoever that shooter is, they haven't missed once." Wanted to believe in miracles. She wanted to believe this was divine intervention, some phantom guardian sent to watch over them. But she also knew the truth of precision. This wasn't luck. This was training. Years, decades maybe. Someone out there had lived a life of solitude with a rifle, and now, inexplicably, they'd chosen this valley, this moment, this team. And yet why? Her hands tightened on her rifle. She wasn't sure if the shiver crawling up her spine was relief or fear. "Charlie actual," Ghost 6 continued. "44 remaining hostiles. They're flanking southwest. Reposition 4 operators immediately." Didn't wait for Titan's order. She was already moving, dragging herself through dirt and stone, her lungs burning as she shifted south to cover the gap. Her mind screamed questions she couldn't silence. Who is he? Why here? Why us? But she kept her scope up, because questions could wait, survival couldn't. For the next 20 minutes, the valley became something we'd never forget. The SEALs fought tooth and nail, but every time the tide threatened to overwhelm them, the mysterious sniper struck. Hostiles cut down mid-command, machine guns silenced in a blink, mortars neutralized before they could fire. And all the while, his voice, Ghost 6, guiding, instructing, steady as stone. He knew their drills, their procedures, their rhythms. He didn't feel like a stranger. He felt like someone who had bled the same as them. His chest ached. Relief was dangerous. It softened edges that needed to stay sharp. And yet, she couldn't stop herself. For the first time since the ambush began, she believed they might make it out alive. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the unease. Whoever Ghost 6 was, he was saving them. But shadows don't appear without reason. And shadows don't stay forever. Exhaled through her teeth, her eye locked through the scope, her finger curled steady against the trigger. She whispered to herself, not to Titan, not to the others, just to her own rattled heart. "Don't you dare vanish." What kind of man sees everything from the shadows and chooses to stay unseen? Pressed her cheek harder into the stock of her rifle, eyes searching, lungs straining. The valley was a labyrinth of stone and fire. Enemy muzzle flashes cut the darkness like lightning. Dust clawed at her throat. Yet she couldn't stop listening for that other sound, the sharp, deliberate crack that meant Ghost 6 had spoken with his rifle again. She'd never heard shooting like it. Not in training, not in combat, not anywhere. There was no hesitation, no wasted rounds. Each shot landed exactly where it needed to, as if the man above them had rehearsed this ambush long before they'd ever walked into it. And with every trigger squeeze, felt something stirring in her chest she couldn't name. It wasn't hope exactly. It wasn't safety. It was something harder, stranger, the pull of a truth she didn't yet understand. Charlie Team, Cave System West. They're establishing fallback positions, interlocking fields of fire if they succeed. The voice in her ear was calm, unshaken, a lighthouse in the storm. Adjusted her scope. The western cliff face split open with jagged mouths of limestone. She caught faint silhouettes moving, enemies ducking into caves, trying to set up defensible choke points. If they dug in there, it would be suicide for the SEALs. Confirmed, she muttered. Before Titan could respond, Ghost 6 added, not going to be an issue much longer. And then the impossible began. His rifle cracked again, but not straight, not direct. Trained eyes tracked the angles, saw bullets ricochet off rock, banking into cave mouths where no line of sight should have existed. Muzzle flashes winked out inside the caves, one after another, as if the bullets themselves bent to his will. Her jaw tightened. How in God's name are you making those shots? A pause, then his reply came matter of fact. Advanced ballistics, environmental physics, 25 years of field experience. Froze 25 years. She was 32. He'd been at this longer than she'd been alive. Her stomach twisted, not from awe, though she felt it, but from the weight of something else. Time. The reminder that one day her hands would shake, her eyes would dim, her skills would fade. And yet here was proof that someone could carry it longer, harder, further than she imagined possible. Crack, another hostile silenced. Charlie Actual, Ghost 6's voice cut in again. Enemy commanders attempting withdrawal north. If they reach their vehicles, they'll return with reinforcements. Heavy weapons. Recommend interdiction. Scope shifted north. Figures moving in tight patterns, purposeful, disciplined. These weren't militia. They were professionals. She could see it in the way they moved. And she could see the fear, too, in their urgency to escape. Ghost 6 already had them in his sights. A string of precise shots rang out fast but never hurried. Commanders dropped one by one, their escape disintegrating into chaos. The valley was shifting. The trap was breaking. Whispered under her breath, though no one could hear, "You're turning the tide by yourself." And yet the more he gave, the more questions clawed at her. Who was this man? Why here? Why them? And what price would come for his intervention? Because nothing in war came free. Not safety, not salvation, not even survival. She glanced sideways at Titan, crouched with his binoculars, blood staining his sleeve. His eyes were locked on the cliffs, as if searching for a glimpse of their savior. But she could see it in him too, the same unease. Ghost 6 was a blessing, yes, but blessings with rifles and secrets were dangerous things. Ghost 6, Titan demanded, identify your background, what branch? The answer came with weight, a voice that carried both truth and restraint. Navy Special Warfare, multiple deployments, ancient history now. Felt something in her chest tighten. Navy, like them. A SEAL, maybe once. But why wasn't he still? Why wasn't he down here beside them instead of haunting them from above like some specter of a war that wouldn't let go? The sniper fire rolled on. Each shot exact. Each kill undeniable. The enemy's formation collapsed from a professional assault into scattered desperation. Picked off stragglers, but she could feel it. Most of the work was no longer hers. Her rifle felt almost redundant compared to the unseen ghost cutting their enemies down with surgical precision. For the first time, the SEALs had space to breathe, a margin of survival, and with that margin came something more dangerous than fear, reflection. His hands trembled on the stock. She flexed her fingers to steady them. Why here? Why now? Why us? The thought wouldn't leave her alone. She was used to fighting enemies she could see, enemies she could hate, but an ally you couldn't explain, an ally who could vanish as easily as he appeared. That was a different kind of weight. Phantom, the voice finally said after another string of shots. Call me Phantom. Let the word settle in her mind. Phantom. It fit. Not a man, not a ghost, but something between. something that chose the middle ground where names blurred and truth was just out of reach. Still, her instincts screamed at her. You don't trust shadows, not in a world where shadows kill. The battle dragged on. Numbers dwindled. What had begun as 52 trained hostiles was collapsing to 28, then fewer. Lungs burned with every breath, her throat raw from shouting fire calls, but she kept moving, kept aiming, kept fighting. Because one truth anchored her amid the storm. Ghost 6 might be their salvation, but he wasn't their guarantee. And then the radio cut again, his voice no longer just calm but urgent. Charlie team, remaining hostiles massing, preparing for a frontal assault. You'll need to engage directly. I cannot reach them in this terrain. His heart dropped. She shifted, scanning. The enemy was forming up, reckless, desperate. This was it, their last push. Titan called it. Hold fire till they close 35 meters, then break them. Swallowed hard, her magazine was nearly dry, her arms ached from recoil, sweat stung her eyes, and yet in that moment she felt something steady her. Not Ghost 6, not Titan, not even the SEALs beside her. Her father's voice from years ago. You don't pull the trigger to kill, you pull it to protect. The difference will eat at you every day you live, but it's the only difference that matters. She braced. The valley erupted again. Hostiles surged forward, gunfire wild, their desperation bleeding into every step. The SEALs answered with controlled bursts, each shot deliberate, even as ammo ran out, even as reloading became frantic, even as their lines trembled under the weight. Fired until her rifle clicked dry, slammed a fresh mag, fired again. Sweat blurred her vision, but she held steady because letting go meant letting death in. And then Ghost 6's voice cut sharp. Charlie team dropped flat now. She didn't think. She dove, pressed into the stone. Bullets whipped overhead. Then crack, crack, crack. His rifle sang again, impossibly threading shots between their prone bodies, cutting down the last wave before they could close the distance. Silence followed, not the uneasy silence from before, a heavy silence, final. Lifted her head slowly. No movement, no muzzle flashes, just bodies, just stillness. Her breath shook, her hands trembled, her eyes burned not from smoke but from something else. Relief, grief, both tangled until she couldn't tell the difference. She reached for her radio. Phantom status. Nothing. Again, Phantom, do you copy? Silence. His chest tightened. He was gone just as sudden as he appeared. No sign, no farewell, only the echo of his shots in the stone around her. And with it, the ache of a truth she didn't want to face. Some saviors don't stay. Why did the silence feel heavier than the gunfire? Crouched low, her back pressed against the jagged stone, her chest heaving. Around her, the SEALs checked wounds, counted magazines, whispered disbelief into the dust-filled air. They were alive, every single one of them. And that in itself felt unnatural. She should have felt triumph. She should have let relief sink in. But instead, her eyes never left the cliffs. The place where the cracks of Phantom's rifle had once rung like salvation. Now there was nothing. No voice. No silhouette. Not even a trace of heat against the stone where a scope might have glinted. It was as if he had never been there at all. Charlie, actual, sound off, Titan called. His voice was rough, but it carried command. One by one, the men responded, wounded, exhausted, ammunition depleted, but alive, always ending with that word as if they couldn't quite believe it themselves. His throat tightened as she gave her own status. Foster, operational, low ammo, no critical injuries. Operational, a clinical word for something that felt so much messier inside. Her hands still shook. Her heart still slammed against her ribs. Her ears still rang, phantom echoes of gunfire bouncing in places silence should reclaimed. She turned her gaze upward again, scanning every ridge. A part of her wanted to see him just once, a shadow, a movement, anything. Another part dreaded it, because once she saw his face, the questions would be harder to bury. Titan barked into his radio, calling command, reporting their survival. The disbelief in his tone was almost hidden, but heard it. The official channels would never believe this story. Not the way it happened. Not the way a phantom sniper had appeared from nowhere and dismantled an ambush that should buried them all. Pulled her knees in, resting the weight of her rifle against her shoulder. Her body begged her to let go, to breathe, to just exist in the fact she was still alive. But her mind refused. The silence left behind by Ghost 6 was deafening. "Why vanish now?" she whispered under her breath. No one heard, maybe she didn't want them to. Minutes dragged before the distant thump of rotor blades carried across the valley. Dust kicked up as 3 crested the cliffs, escorted by Apache. Extraction. Finally. The SEALs looked up, some with relief, some with quiet awe, some too tired to even react. His chest ached at the sight. The cavalry always came late. Marines poured out when the birds touched down, weapons raised, ready for resistance. But there was none. Only bodies, dozens of them. Enemy combatants sprawled across the valley floor in positions that made no tactical sense. Holes cut into caves where no bullet should reach. Shot groupings so precise it felt less like war and more like a demonstration. Felt the hairs rise on her neck. The Marines walked among the carnage, confusion on their faces. One of them muttered, "What the hell happened here?" Titan's reply was steady, "We held the line." But heard the lie. They hadn't held the line, not alone. They'd been held, carried, saved. And now their savior had disappeared as if he never existed. She climbed aboard the extraction bird, her body heavy, her rifle heavier. As the rotors roared and the valley shrank beneath them, she kept her eyes locked on the cliffs, waiting, hopping, fearing. Nothing. Only stone, shadow, and the echo of a presence she couldn't prove. The debrief was worse than the firefight. Sat in a sterile room, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Across the table, officers sifted through after-action reports. Titan did most of the speaking, his voice level, recounting details with clinical precision. The ambush, the numbers, the survival. But every time he reached the part where Phantom should have been mentioned, his tone shifted, bending around the truth like a river cutting stone. Words chosen carefully. Ghost 6 became silence. Phantom became omission. "Lieutenant Commander," the reviewing officer said finally, "you're officially reporting 12 operators survived against overwhelming odds, with 52 confirmed hostiles neutralized, all without external support." Titan's jaw clenched. "Yes, sir, that's the report." Sat rigid in her chair, nails digging into her palms. The truth sat like a stone in her throat. She wanted to speak, wanted to shout, wanted to demand they acknowledge what saved them, but her voice stayed trapped. Because she saw it in Titan's eyes, the command decision had already been made. Phantom wasn't going to exist in any official record. When the meeting adjourned, lingered in the corridor, her back against the cold wall. The men filed out, some joking, some too hollow to speak. Titan walked past her without a glance. She stayed there, staring at the floor, trying to untangle the storm in her chest. They were alive. They should have been dead. That should have been enough. But it was. She closed her eyes. All she saw was stone cliffs and the invisible thread of a bullet weaving through air. All she heard was that voice, "Maintain your positions and allow me to work." It haunted her because it wasn't just a savior's command. It was something else, something deeper, something that sounded like belonging. That night couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, the barracks filled with the sound of restless breathing and shifting bodies. Everyone else seemed to settle eventually, exhaustion pulling them under. But her mind refused. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the valley, heard the rifle, felt the silence after. Around 200, she gave up. She pulled her boots back on, grabbed her jacket, and slipped out into the night air. The base was quiet, the world wrapped in darkness. She found herself walking toward the perimeter, toward the open ground where the horizon stretched into shadow. She tilted her head back, eyes searching the sky. No stars here, only cloud, only night. But in her chest, she felt that same pull as when the first crack of Phantom's rifle had sounded. That gravity toward something unseen. That ache for an answer she couldn't name. She whispered into the wind, knowing no one could hear. "Who are you?" Silence answered. But silence wasn't empty anymore. Not for her. Silence now carried the weight of a man she'd never seen, who had chosen to disappear rather than be known. And deep down, realized something that unsettled her more than the ambush itself. She needed to find him. Not because he saved her, not because he saved the team, but because he left her with questions that clawed at the edges of her soul. Questions about what it meant to serve, what it meant to sacrifice, what it meant to vanish and yet still carry the weight of others, survival. She pressed her hands into her pockets, her fingers brushing the folded letter she'd never sent, a confession she'd been too afraid to share. For the first time, she understood why. Some truths weren't meant to be spoken in daylight. Some truths lived in shadows. And now so did she. Turned back toward the barracks, her boots crunching in the dirt, her chest heavy with a vow she didn't fully understand. If Phantom was a ghost, then she would haunt the silence until she found him. Because sometimes survival wasn't enough. Sometimes the soul demanded more than living. It demanded answers. Why was she more restless in safety than under fire? Sat on the edge of her bunk, elbows on her knees, staring at her boots. Days had passed since the ambush, but the silence he left behind hadn't loosened its grip. Phantom was gone, yet everywhere in her thoughts, in her heartbeat, in the shadows that lingered when the base quieted at night. Her teammates were adjusting. They laughed again, trained again, argued again. Survival had restored their rhythm, but couldn't find hers. Every time her hands wrapped around her rifle, every time she lined her sights, all she could hear was his voice through the radio. "Maintain your positions and allow me to work." It wasn't just the words. It was the way they steadied her. The way they pulled her back from the edge of despair when she was seconds from giving up. A stranger's voice, sharper than any order, softer than any comfort she'd ever known in war. She wasn't supposed to dwell on it, she knew that. Soldiers didn't chase phantoms. Soldiers took orders, fought, survived. But something in her refused to let go. Titan caught her lingering at the shooting range one evening, firing long after the others had left. He stood behind her, arms crossed, his bandaged sleeve stiff with dried blood. "You're trying too hard, Wraith," he muttered, using her. "Your groups are already clean, cleaner than most." Reloaded, chambered, and fired again. The bullet punched dead center, but she didn't relax. Not clean enough. Titan's gaze was heavy but not unkind. "This isn't about your shooting, is it?" She didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. Titan sighed, stepping closer. "Look, I know what's eating at you, but command already buried it. Phantom doesn't exist on paper, he never will, and if you keep digging, you'll bury yourself too." Lowered the rifle, her hands trembling despite her control. She stared downrange, refusing to meet his eyes. "He saved us, every single one of us, and we just pretend he wasn't there." "That's the job," Titan said quietly. "We live with ghosts, we don't chase them." Finally turned, her voice was sharp, bitter. "Maybe that's why they keep haunting us." Titan held her gaze for a long moment, then walked away without another word. She fired again, and again, and again. The cracks of her rifle echoed into the night, but none of them carried the same weight as his had. Began her search in silence. It started small, reading old case files, combing through training records, looking for anomalies in mission reports from other units. She pretended it was casual curiosity to fill empty hours. But it was. Every page she turned, every classified brief she managed to glimpse, she was looking for one thing: evidence of a man who shouldn't exist. At first there was nothing. Just endless documents stamped with red tape, reports polished clean of irregularities. Official accounts rarely left room for the unexplainable. But then she found whispers. A mission years earlier in the Hindu Kush. An American recon team cornered, then mysteriously spared by precision fire from an unknown shooter. No names, no coordinates. Just a line buried deep in the report. Survival unexplainable given circumstances. Another in South America. A covert squad outnumbered 10-1, their survival credited to unexpected disruption of hostile forces. Again, no explanation. Pulse raced, it wasn't proof, but it was a pattern. Still, chasing it meant crossing lines. She knew the risk. Soldiers didn't go digging through archives for the comfort of their own conscience. That was how careers died, reputations shattered. Yet every time she thought about stopping, she remembered the sound of his rifle threading the valley, saving lives with impossible precision. She couldn't walk away, not now, not ever. One evening, after the others had turned in, sat alone at a metal desk, a dim lamp her only light. She traced a finger along a map, the spread before her. Her mind replayed every second of the ambush, every angle of fire, every word from his voice. She whispered into the empty room, "Why were you there?" Her radio, silent since extraction, remained on her desk. She stared at it, wishing it would crackle to life with his voice again, wishing he'd tell her to maintain position, to trust him, to let him work. But it didn't. It never would. And yet, sometimes when exhaustion blurred the line between waking and dreaming, she swore she could hear him. Just a breath, a word, a presence hovering on the edge of silence. Enough to keep her chasing, enough to keep her awake. Weeks later, their team rotated stateside for recovery and training cycles, expected the pull to lessen. Distance usually softened battle's edges, but it didn't. If anything, the ache grew sharper in safety. During downtime, she found herself sitting in cafes, scanning faces in the crowd. Older men with a certain bearing, eyes that watched more than they spoke, hands steady in ways only experience carved. Every time her breath caught, her pulse quickened. Every time disappointment followed. She hated herself for it, for searching, for hopping, for needing, but she couldn't stop. It all came to a head one night when she visited her father. He poured her a drink, his weathered hand steady. He'd been military once too, long before her. The kind of man who understood what the silence of service carved into a soul. "You're different," he said quietly, studying her. "Harder, but not in the way you should be." Stared into the glass. "What do you mean?" "You've always carried the weight of others, but now it's like you're chasing something you lost." Her throat tightened. She couldn't tell him, couldn't speak Phantom's name, but she whispered, "What if someone saves you and then vanishes? What if you can't let it go?" Her father's eyes softened, though his voice carried steel. "Then you have to ask yourself if you're searching for them or for yourself." His chest ached. The words landed deeper than she wanted them to, but they didn't quiet the storm. If anything, they made it louder. Because the truth was clear now. She wasn't just searching for Phantom. She was searching for the part of herself that disappeared in that valley, the part that trusted shadows, that believed in salvation, that couldn't rest until she understood why a stranger had chosen to carry her life on the weight of his trigger finger. Months passed. Missions came and went, fought, trained, endured. Outwardly she was steady. Inwardly she was restless, always listening for a crack that never came, always waiting for a voice that never spoke again. Until one day it did. A routine training exercise in the desert, simulated ambush, blank rounds, controlled chaos, but in the middle of it, amid the shouting and the dust, her radio hissed. Not command, not her team. A different frequency, a voice she hadn't heard in months. Calm, steady, impossible. "Wraith, maintain your position." Her blood ran cold. She froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. She pulled the radio close, whispering harshly, "Phantom, is that you?" Silence followed. The line cut. The exercise rolled on around her, teammates yelling, blanks popping, dust choking the air. But stood there, her hands trembling, her soul on fire. Because for the first time since she knew he was still out there, still watching, still choosing his moments. And now more than ever she knew. She wouldn't stop until she found him. Why did rumors always sound truer than reports? Sat in the corner of a crowded bar near the docks, her pulled low, her glass untouched. Around her, voices rose and fell in drunken rhythm. Sailors, contractors, mercenaries, men who lived half in shadows and half in lies. The kind of place official uniforms avoided. The kind of place had started frequenting more often than her superiors would approve. She wasn't here for drinks. She wasn't here for company. She was here for whispers. And she heard them. Two men at the table beside her spoke in low voices, thinking no one cared. They mentioned a story out of the Hindu Kush, an American recon team saved by precision fire that no one could explain. Their tone was half disbelief, half reverence. His pulse quickened. She'd read the report. Now she was hearing the story retold, distorted by rumor but rooted in something real. She didn't lean closer, she didn't interrupt. She knew better than that. You don't chase shadows head-on, you wait, you listen. And sometimes the shadows step closer on their own. When the men finally left, slipped out behind them, keeping her distance. Their voices carried down the alley. One of them muttered, "They say it was the same ghost who's been showing up for years. Shows up, saves a unit, disappears before anyone can thank him." The other laughed nervously. "That's not real, just stories soldiers tell to sleep at night." But knew better. She'd heard his voice. She lived his work. It wasn't just a story, it was him. And the stories were spreading. The more she searched, the more fragments she uncovered. A Colombian jungle, insurgents routed by an unknown sniper. A desert convoy ambush, attackers neutralized before air support arrived. An African coast, pirates scattered by shots no one saw fired. Different continents, different years, always the same thread, survival where survival shouldn't exist. Started drawing lines on maps late at night, tracing events, looking for patterns. She built a wall of notes, connecting dots with string like some conspiracy theorist. She hated the way it looked, hated how it made her feel, obsessive, unhinged, desperate. But she couldn't stop. Every red string pulled her closer to a single truth. Phantom wasn't an accident. He was deliberate. He chose his moments. He chose his battles. And she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd chosen her too. That thought haunted her most. Why had he spoken to her? Why had his voice steadied her more than anyone else? Why did she feel like he'd aimed every word not at the team, not at Titan, but at her? Her search didn't stay secret. One morning, Titan confronted her in the gym. He didn't raise his voice, didn't bark orders. He just stood over her as she worked the pull-up bar, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. "Wraith, you're chasing smoke. Commands already noticed." She dropped to the mat, sweat slicking her face. "Not smoke, patterns. Patterns that aren't your job to follow." Grabbed a towel, her voice sharp. "He saved us, Titan. Don't you care who he was?" "I care about my team staying operational," Titan snapped. "And I care about you not throwing your career away for a ghost." Stared at him, chest heaving. He meant it. He was protecting her in his own rigid way, but he didn't understand. This wasn't about career anymore. It was about conscience, about a piece of herself she'd left in that valley. "Maybe some ghosts deserve to be chased," she whispered. Titan shook his head and walked out. But his warning didn't slow her. If anything, it pushed her harder. Search took her to training ranges in Nevada, to veterans' halls in Virginia, to forgotten records buried in digital archives. She asked careful questions, probed gently, always listening for a slip. And sometimes she got one. An older Marine at a VFW bar told her about a mission in the 90s where an unofficial sniper covered their retreat. "Never knew his name," the Marine muttered, staring into his glass. But he wasn't one of ours, moved like a shadow, shot like God himself was steadying his hand. His heart raced. Another time she cornered a retired Army intel officer after a lecture. He laughed when she mentioned the rumors, but the laugh was strained. Off the record. Yeah, we've heard about him. Different names. Phantom, Ghost, Guardian, never confirmed. Never. Pressed harder, but the officer shut down, his smile fading. Don't chase that, soldier. Some men want to be forgotten, and if you keep looking, you might find out why. The warning sat in her gut like lead. But warnings had never stopped her before. Late one night, back in her quarters, stared at her wall of notes. Maps covered in lines, articles, obscure reports, scribbled whispers. She leaned against the wall, exhaustion pulling her down. Her eyes burned, her body begged for sleep, but her mind kept circling. Why did she need this so badly? It wasn't just gratitude, it wasn't just survival, it was something deeper, something more dangerous. When Phantom spoke, she'd felt seen in a way she couldn't explain. Not as a soldier, not as a sniper, not even as a survivor, but as a human being standing on the edge of despair, held steady by a stranger's calm. And now she couldn't let it go. The breakthrough came where she least expected it. She was in a military symposium hall, attending a briefing she barely cared about, when she overheard two contractors whispering behind her. One of them mentioned the valley with the ghost. His chest tightened. She turned slowly, her voice quiet but steady. What ghost? The men blinked, caught off guard. One chuckled nervously. Just a story. Some SEALs were saved by a sniper no one saw. My buddy swears he heard the guy's voice on comms. His heart hammered. Where'd your buddy hear that? The man shrugged. Conference in D.C. said some older guy was talking about it like he'd been there. Older guy, conference, D.C. Didn't sleep that night. She booked a flight instead. Washington buzzed with polished suits and cold marble. Felt out of place, her posture military straight, her eyes sharp. She moved through symposium receptions and banquets, listening, watching. And then she saw him. Not Phantom, but a man who might know. Late 60s, gray beard, eyes too steady to belong to a civilian. He moved through the room with quiet authority, saying little, watching much. His gut clenched, her instincts screamed. She approached carefully, heart in her throat. Sir, she said, voice calm despite the storm inside. You were in the, weren't you? The man's eyes flicked to hers. For a heartbeat, something shifted in them, recognition maybe, or warning. Then he smiled faintly, too polite. You must have me confused. He walked away. Stood frozen, her breath caught, her heart roaring in her ears. But she knew. It was him. And now, more than ever, she couldn't stop. How do you confront a ghost without scaring it away? Followed him through the crowded reception hall, her steps careful, her breath shallow. The man moved with quiet certainty, weaving through polished suits and military brass without drawing attention. He wasn't hiding. He didn't need to. Most people never noticed men like him, but did. She couldn't not. Her pulse hammered. Months of searching, years of whispers, nights staring at maps, all of it had led her here, to the back of a conference hall in Washington. She caught up to him near a set of double doors, her voice low but unshaken. Phantom. The man stopped. He didn't turn immediately. For a moment, thought he might simply vanish into the crowd, leaving her with nothing but echoes again. But then he looked over his shoulder. Up close, his face was older than she expected, weathered. Lines carved deep by years in places no sunlight reached. His beard was trimmed but rough. His eyes were what froze her, calm, sharp, unyielding. They carried the weight of someone who had seen too much, done too much, and decided to carry it alone. Sergeant Foster, he said quietly, as if her name were a truth he'd known long before she spoke it. His breath caught. You know me. I know your kind, he replied, the ones who can't let silence rest. Her chest tightened. "You saved us back in the valley, you." He cut her off with a small shake of his head. "No, you saved yourselves. I just made sure the odds weren't impossible." Stepped closer, her voice firm. Why were you there? Why me?" His gaze held hers for a long beat. Then he turned fully, stepping away from the crowd, motioning her toward a quiet corridor, followed without hesitation. The hallway was dim, lined with portraits of decorated officers. Phantom leaned against the wall beneath one, his arms crossed, his presence both guarded and deliberate. Stood opposite him, her shoulders squared, though her insides were unsteady. "You shouldn't have chased me," he said first. "You shouldn't have disappeared," she shot back. A faint smirk touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Disappearances keep men like me alive." His jaw tightened. "You don't sound dead." "No," he admitted, "but I'm not alive the way you think either." The words cut sharper than she expected. She steadied her breath. "Who are you really?" "Someone who doesn't exist anymore." "That's not good enough." Phantom studied her, his expression unreadable. "You think finding me will give you peace? It won't. The answers you're chasing don't heal. They just trade one weight for another." His chest ached. "Then let me carry it. You saved 12 of us. You don't get to vanish and leave us with nothing but questions." His eyes softened just slightly. 12, you counted." "Of course I counted." Her voice cracked before she steadied it again. "We all walked out alive because of you. That matters." Phantom looked away, his gaze tracing the portraits on the wall. "I don't do it for gratitude or recognition. I do it because some debts never end. Some wars don't let go no matter how many years pass, so I keep working, in silence, alone." Stepped closer, her voice trembling between defiance and desperation. "But why me? Why talk to me on the radio? Why my name? You could stayed silent." Phantom finally looked back at her, his eyes piercing. "Because you were breaking, and breaking gets people killed. I spoke because you needed to remember how to stand." His throat tightened, emotion clawing its way up. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall here in front of him. "And now, what am I supposed to do with all this?" "Live," he said simply. "Live so that the next time silence feels heavier than gunfire, you remember that survival is the point. Not answers, not ghosts, just survival." His words cut deep, but they didn't soothe. They only stirred more, clenched her fists. "That's not enough, not for me." Phantom exhaled, slow and heavy, as if he carried 1,000 lifetimes in that breath. "Then you'll keep chasing me. And one day, you'll realize you've become the very thing you're hunting." The thought chilled her, but it also struck something truer than she wanted to admit. They stood in silence for a long moment. The weight of unsaid things pressed down, thick as the stone that still haunted her dreams. Finally, Phantom straightened. "This conversation never happened," he said firmly. Shook her head. "You can't erase this, not from me." He studied her again, softer now. "No, I suppose I can't." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A coin. He pressed it into her palm, closing her fingers over it with a hand that was steady, strong, unyielding. Opened her hand slowly. It was a challenge coin, Navy Special Warfare Association. But etched on the back by hand were 12 small stars arranged in a circle. Her breath hitched. "One for each of you," Phantom said quietly. "A reminder not of me, of survival." His vision blurred. She swallowed hard, clutching the coin like it was a lifeline. "Will I see you again?" Phantom's eyes softened in a way that broke her. "You'll hear me when you need me most, but seeing me," he shook his head, "that's not how ghosts work." He turned, walking down the corridor, his steps steady, his presence fatting. Wanted to follow, to demand more, to hold onto him. But something in his words stopped her. "One day, you'll realize you've become the very thing you're hunting." She stood frozen, the coin burning in her hand, her heart torn between gratitude and grief. Because she knew he was right. She was already becoming him. That night sat alone in her quarters, the coin resting on the table before her. She stared at the 12 stars until her eyes blurred. She thought of the men who'd survived, of Titan's steady commands, of her own finger curling against the trigger when she thought it was over. And she thought of Phantom. Not his face, not his name, just his voice, the calm in the chaos, the silence that followed, the shadow that saved them all then walked away. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Ask yourself if you're searching for them or for yourself. She closed her eyes, gripping the coin until her knuckles turned white. For the first time, she wondered if the man she chased was less important than the woman she was becoming because of him. And that terrified her more than the valley ever had. Why did the metal on her chest feel lighter than the coin in her pocket? Stood in formation, her uniform pressed, her boots shining, her face carved into military stoicism. The ceremony was brief, efficient, a commendation for her role in the operation. No names of ghosts, no mention of impossible precision fire, just neat words about resilience, courage, and unit cohesion. The officer pinned the medal onto her uniform. Cameras clicked, applause rippled politely. Nodded, saluted, stood tall. Inside, she felt hollow. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, she set the medal on the table beside Phantom's coin. The metal gleamed, polished, official. The coin was rough, etched with 12 imperfect stars. She stared at both for a long time before whispering, "Only one of you feels real." The cracks began to show slowly. During training, found herself distracted, her eyes scanning the instead of focusing on the targets in front of her. Titan called her out after a live fire drill, his voice sharp. "Wraith, you're not here. What the hell is going on with you?" She clenched her jaw. "I'm here." "No," he snapped, stepping closer. "You're somewhere else, chasing shadows, and it's bleeding into the team." His words cut deeper than he knew. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped, because he was right. She was somewhere else, always. Titan's voice softened slightly. "I don't care what ghost you're hunting, but when you're on this range, when you're on mission, you're ours. Not his, ours." Swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. Understood. But she didn't mean it. The nightmares grew worse. She'd wake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, hearing his voice in her dreams. Sometimes steady, calm, reminding her to hold her position. Sometimes silent, crushing her chest with the weight of abandonment. One night she dreamt of the valley again. But this time, when the final silence fell, she turned to see who had saved them. And in the dream, the sniper on the cliff was Phantom. It was her. She woke gasping, shaking, staring at her own hands like they belonged to someone else. The dream lingered, gnawing at her. Was this what Phantom meant? That one day she would become what she was chasing? And if so, was that salvation or a curse? Her performance reviews slipped. Not enough to trigger discipline, but enough to draw attention. One evaluator noted, highly capable, increasingly isolated, appears distracted outside of combat environments. Crumpled the paper when she read it, her stomach nodding. They didn't understand. They couldn't. This wasn't distraction. This was focus of a different kind, a deeper one. Still, she couldn't ignore the reality. Her obsession was becoming visible. The breaking point came during a mission in Eastern Europe. A routine reconnaissance, simple in design but tense in execution. His team moved through dense woodland, their radios crackling softly, their eyes scanning. She was point sniper, her scope sweeping the tree line. Halfway through, her radio hissed with static and then, faintly, a voice. "Maintain your position." Froze. It wasn't command, it was Titan, it was him. Her pulse skyrocketed. She turned her scope, searching the no visual, but the voice was real, she knew it was. "Phantom," she whispered, too soft for the others to hear. No reply. Titan hissed through comms, "Wraith, what's your holdup? Move." Blinked, her breath sharp. Her finger trembled against the trigger. For a split second, she wanted to disobey, to hold, to wait for Phantom's voice again. But she moved. The mission continued. Nothing catastrophic happened. They returned safely. But Titan's glare burned into her when they debriefed. Later, he cornered her. His voice was low, dangerous. "Don't you ever freeze on me again. Not for ghosts, not for voices, not for anything." Met his eyes, her chest tight. What if it wasn't a ghost? Titan stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head. "Then it's worse, because it means you'll never let go." The warning signs kept piling up. Started avoiding social events, isolating herself from her team. She spent her nights digging through files, tracing rumors, staring at Phantom's coin until her vision blurred. She wasn't reckless in combat, not yet, but she was different, too different. And Command noticed. One evening she was called into a private briefing room. A colonel sat across from her, his face carved from stone. "Sergeant Foster," he began, "you're one of our finest operators. Your skills are not in question, but your judgment, your focus, we have concerns." Stomach clenched. "Concerns?" "About your fixation," the colonel said bluntly. "We've received reports from your teammates, from your commanding officer. You're chasing phantoms. Literally." His hands curled into fists in her lap. "With respect, sir, those phantoms saved lives." The colonel's gaze didn't waver. "Perhaps, or perhaps they're stories you tell yourself to explain the unexplainable. Either way, your job is to focus on the mission in front of you, not ghosts behind you." His throat tightened. "And if the ghosts are real, then let them haunt someone else," the colonel said coldly. "Because if this continues, you won't be on missions much longer." The words landed like a blow, not a threat, a promise. That night sat on her bunk, the coin in her palm, her medal shoved into a drawer. She turned the coin over and over, her chest aching. She whispered into the darkness, "They don't believe, they don't see, but I know you're real, I know." Silence answered. And in that silence, she realized something terrifying. The more they doubted him, the more she believed. The more they dismissed her, the more she clung to the memory. She wasn't sure anymore if she was proving Phantom's existence or her own. The next morning she looked at herself in the mirror. Uniform perfect, hair tied back, rifle cleaned and ready. But her eyes looked like his. Calm, sharp, unyielding. And for the first time, she wondered if Titan was right. Maybe she was no longer theirs. Maybe she was already his. What happens when the ghost you've been chasing finally asks you to let go? The mission was supposed to be simple. A short reconnaissance in eastern Afghanistan, low risk, low profile. His team had done 100 just like it, but she knew better. Simple didn't exist anymore. Not for her. The moment the team dropped into the valley, her chest tightened. The air smelled the same as the sharp limestone, dry earth, smoke lingering like a warning. She felt her pulse spike, her body remembering what her mind tried to bury. "Stay sharp," Titan said over comms. His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked to her longer than anyone else. He didn't trust her anymore, not completely. She couldn't blame him. Adjusted her scope, scanning the ridges. Every shadow looked like it might move. Every glint of stone felt like it might breathe. She wasn't looking for hostiles, not really. She was looking for him. The ambush came just past midday. A sudden crack of gunfire from the cliffs, dirt exploding around them. The team dropped low, returning fire, the valley erupting into chaos. His rifle snapped to her shoulder, her scope locking onto targets. She fired, dropped one, shifted, dropped another. Her training was muscle memory now, precise, controlled. But then, the sound she had been waiting for. Crack. Not her rifle, not the enemy, his. His blood froze. She knew that sound, she'd know it anywhere. The impossible precision, the authority of silence breaking clean. Her earpiece buzzed, a voice cut through the static, calm, steady, unmistakable. "Maintain your position." Her throat closed. It was him, Phantom. After all the silence, all the searching, all the questions, he was here, watching, covering them again. The team didn't react, only she heard him. Wraith, his voice continued, low but certain. You're about to make a choice. Her chest ached. What choice? She whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear. You already know, he replied. The firefight raged on. Enemy fighters closed in from three sides, disciplined and relentless. Titan barked orders, shifting men to cover flanks, his voice cutting through the chaos. Fired until her magazine clicked empty, reloaded, fired again. But her eyes kept drifting to the cliffs, searching for him. Phantom's rifle spoke in perfect rhythm, every shot carving space for them to breathe. And then his voice came again. Wraith, break off. There's a ridge north, higher ground. You'll have control. You can end this. Her pulse hammered. He was telling her to move. To leave her team, climb the ridge, take the high position. It was sound tactics. It was what he would do. But Titan's voice snapped across comms. Wraith, hold position. Do not break. Repeat, hold position. Two voices, two commands. One from the man who had saved her. One from the man who led her. His hands trembled on the rifle. Her mind spiraled. She remembered Titan dragging them through firefights, keeping them alive with sheer will. She remembered Phantom steadying her when she was breaking, guiding her through silence. Both were true, both had saved her. But now, one wanted her to stay. The other wanted her to leave. Her chest burned with the weight of the choice. Duty pressed one way, obsession pulled the other. Her father's words echoed in her head. Don't do this to be a hero. Do this to be human. She clenched her jaw, her breath sharp. She had to decide. Gunfire tore the air. A seal screamed as rounds ripped the ground near him. Titan barked for covering fire, dragging the wounded to safety. His hands shook. She shifted her rifle, fired again, dropping an enemy fighter. But the ridge called to her. She could feel Phantom's presence there, steady, waiting. Her earpiece buzzed once more. Wraith, choose. Tears stung her eyes. She whispered, barely audible, why me? Phantom's voice came soft, almost tender. Because you're the only one who listens. Her lungs ached. She wanted to go. God, she wanted to go. To climb the ridge, to stand where he stood, to see the battle from his impossible height, to become what he warned she would. But then she looked at her team. Titan, bloodied but unbroken. The SEALs, tired but unyielding. Brothers who had trusted her, fought beside her, bled beside her. She realized then what Phantom had meant all along. Becoming him wasn't salvation. It was solitude. It was exile. It was a life lived in silence, carrying debts no one else could see. And maybe that was his path, but it wasn't hers. Pressed her cheek against her rifle stock, sighting down the scope. Her voice was steady now, calm in the storm. Negative, Phantom, I stay with them. The firefight dragged on, brutal and unrelenting. Phantom's rifle still cracked from the cliffs, thinning the enemy ranks with impossible precision, but never broke from her team. She fired, reloaded, shifted, covered. She moved with Titan's commands, steady and sure. And together they held. Minutes bled into hours until at last the valley fell silent again. No movement, no muzzle flashes, just bodies scattered across the rocks. Titan exhaled hard, his voice hoarse. Sound off. One by one the men answered, alive, wounded but alive. Lowered her rifle, her arms trembling, sweat stinging her eyes. She looked to the cliffs, searching for one last glimpse of him. Nothing. Her earpiece crackled faintly, one final whisper. Well done, Wraith. Then silence. Extraction came hours later. The team loaded into the, exhausted but intact. Titan slumped into his seat, his eyes meeting for a brief moment. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He'd seen her choice. Sat with her rifle across her lap, the coin burning in her pocket. Her chest felt heavy and light all at once. She knew Phantom was still out there. She knew he would always be. But she also knew something more important now. She didn't need to chase him anymore. Because his lesson wasn't about him. It was about her. Months later, sat alone at her father's kitchen table. The medal still lay in a drawer somewhere, untouched. But the coin rested in front of her, its 12 stars catching the dim light. Her father poured coffee, his voice steady. "You look different, lighter." Traced the coin with her thumb. "I made a choice." He nodded slowly, waiting. She looked out the window, the world quiet, her voice soft. "I chose to stay, with my team, with myself, not the ghost." Her father studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Then you found your answer." Held the coin, her chest swelling with something she hadn't felt in months. Not peace, not exactly, but something close enough to live with. She whispered to herself, so soft only she could hear. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And with that, she closed her hand around the coin, ready for whatever silence waited next.